Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast brought to you by BuckeyeHuddle.com. I'm Mark Givler. Got Kevin Noon with me here today. We are about to come out of a dead period. The month of February is a dead period. No recruiting visitors are allowed on campus, which opens up in March and becomes a big thing. So the Buckeyes will open spring ball March 7th, Kevin, I believe. And then from there, we will see a lot of visitors come through throughout the month of March. And so there's some really big visits on deck here the next 5 or 6 weeks. And I kind of wanted to set the table on that. Some of these guys are going to be different baskets here. Some of these guys are in decision mode right now, and these visits are going to be huge. Some of these guys are more Ohio State kind of needs to get them on campus and get a feel for where Ohio State sits with these kids. And then there's a couple others that are just kind of in-state. There's an in-state guy we're going to talk about who doesn't have an offer yet. And, you know, that visit may be more of a feeling out process and more of a eyeball test process as the Buckeyes try and find out if they're going to offer or not. So we're going to go in, we're not going to talk about every March visitor. We don't even know every March visitor yet, but we're going to go through about 5 interesting visitors for the month of March that, again, are all at kind of different parts of their recruiting process and kind of set the table for March. So the first guy we want to talk about is Nolan Davenport. He is a offensive tackle from Massillon Washington High School here in Ohio. He is starting to get a lot of Big Ten interest and offers and is, in my opinion, the next best offensive tackle in the state of Ohio behind Carter Lowe, who Ohio State obviously has committed. So Nolan is scheduled to visit on March 7th. And this one's kind of a different visit, I think, than the other visits we're going to talk about. Because, again, he doesn't have an offer, but I think he's on the radar enough that there's at least a 50+% chance that he does get an offer. And I think one of the big things Ohio State's wanting to see, and this may not be able to take place until later in the spring or even in June, but I think they want to see how he is able to put on weight and how he is able to move at that weight and how he looks at that weight. Nolan was a tight end up until about, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. He is a converted tight end. So he started at offensive tackle, obviously this year for Massillon for a state championship winning team. He had a great year, great junior season. At one point was only playing at like 235, 240. I think he's supposed to be up around 255, 260 right now. And so Ohio State's going to want to kind of eyeball him on this visit, get to know him better. Kevin, it just doesn't feel like they have all these amazing options right now out of state. This could be an important visit just to kind of take the temperature on things and see how close maybe they are to offering.
Right. These types of visits now were the see you in camp visits when the calendar was a little slower. You didn't necessarily need to move as quickly and be making these types of decisions potentially in March. You could make it to your camps. He is about 260. You want to get eyes on him. I mean, obviously he's going to be there checking out Ohio State's spring practice. There's a practice on the 7th, with that being the first week of practice before the Buckeyes go on spring break and then do all the remainder of spring practice on the back end of the Ohio State spring break. But we've talked about it through the years, well before we ever had podcasts, years and years and years ago, that Ohio State and any in-state school has to be careful when it comes to how it approaches an in-state kid, regardless if it is at a powerhouse school that turns out a lot of talent, your St. Ed, your Massillon Washingtons, your Pickerington schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or a school that turns out a kid once every blue moon. And when you offer, then you better be ready to accept the offer. So you're not going to see Ohio State paper the state with a ton of offers and then have to back away from things, slow play kids, whatever the terminology that you may want to use. So this is going to be an important meeting for the Buckeyes to kind of see how Nolan is growing into an offensive lineman's body, if he is still, if he still has that type of mobility. I mean, you're not having the benefit of putting him through a camp, but you best know what's going on with somebody before you get to that camp season.
Yeah, and so another thing that will help Ohio State here, that kind of more of a recent rule change, is the state of Ohio is now allowing some football activity in May during the spring evaluation period. So we covered a lot of this stuff last May. High schools would have like pro day type things, or they'd even do some 7-on-7 stuff, and there'd be 50 college coaches there. And so they'll get a look at Nolan in May, even though he won't be able to camp with Ohio State yet. So that'll be another key data point, I think, is getting up to Massillon in May to just watch him go through drills, watch him just see the progress his body has made and just how he's moving at that weight. But this is a key visit, I think, for everyone. If you're Nolan, you have Big Ten offers right now. You're getting a lot of interest right now. I think you want to make sure that Ohio State's interest is genuine when you're on your visit. And if you're Ohio State, you want to see, okay, how you're carrying that 260. And so do I expect an offer to go out on that visit? I would say no. It wouldn't stun me if it did. I mean, he may show up at 270 and they'll be like, oh my gosh, he looks great. We're going to offer. We like the film, and we liked the film at 250. Now he's 270. Like, let's just do this. I'm not ruling that out, but I would guess it's maybe more of a May or June. But yeah, so I think that's an interesting visit, and that'll be kind of one of the first visits of the spring session. So that'll be one of the first kind of name guys they bring in. And again, with all the talk about offensive line recruiting, I think that'll be an interesting one to watch here and follow the next couple months. Moving into mid-March, this has a completely different dynamic for me. On March 18th, Ohio State is set to host 2 4-star defensive linemen from the state of Texas. Both guys are, kind of listed as defensive linemen. I think they're both probably going to be defensive tackles. And that is Gus Cordova out of Lake Travis, familiar school in Austin, Texas. And Landon Rink is out of the Houston area. So these guys are, again, these are 4-star prospects. They've got a lot of the big offers down in Texas. These are Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma. Those are the guys they're competing with right now. With these 2 prospects, this is a kind of a different feel in that we've talked a lot about the Midwest and how good that looks for defensive linemen this year and how much that could maybe help Ohio State. So they need to know very early, like, you've got all these bodies in Indiana and Ohio and Illinois that you can go after. You need to know by the end of March where you're at with the Texas guys. You don't want to be chasing these guys in October, holding off a kid from Indiana who might be a similar player because you're holding out for the guy from Texas who may or may not be a long shot. I mean, I'm not saying that you need to walk away committed in March, but you need to have an idea like, okay, are we in the top 2 or 3? Are we leading? Are we just a hat on the table? And if we're a hat on the table, we need to walk away. So that's going to be big. I talked to Landon Rink a little bit this week. He said he's talking to Larry Johnson every day. So that was interesting. Larry's pretty selective with who he talks to every day. So that kind of raised my eyebrows a little bit. But, getting these guys on campus is an important thing, Kevin, and just kind of getting some clarity on where they're at.
Yeah, exactly. And specifically with Landon Rink being in the Houston area, Devin Sanchez is somebody I'm sure that could get into his ear, as he and his family have both been very active in talking to kids, whether or not it's been just on open Twitter or X or whatever the hell we're calling that for that platform right now, or private messaging, text messages. But you do want to know where you stand with these guys, because there is so much about being like, okay, you are going to be a top 2 team, top 3 team for this guy. You're in the group, or you're just, you're there. And it's great to sit there and say you have an Ohio State offer, but you're not leaving the state, you're not leaving the region, whatever, what have you. And you have to determine these things, because no matter how hard you want to work, Mark Pantoni and the coaches and everybody else involved in the recruiting effort, Aaron Dunstan, et cetera, there are only so many widgets that you can have, and you have to figure out where you're going to put. In this basket we're going to put 10, and in this basket we're going to put 2, and in this basket we're not going to put any, because we're just a hat on the table, as you said. So you want to know, and we're talking about 17-year-old kids, and things change. You don't know exactly what you determine in March doesn't mean that that's how the kid is going to feel in May or August or October or December when it comes time to sign, since most kids sign in the early period at this point. But I think these are very important, players for Ohio State to get an idea about, because we watched last year and Ohio State stayed in on a lot of kids, and there were some that it's just like, well, I think they're going to get them, and things looked great, and then it fell apart, including the defensive tackle out of IMG Academy last year that didn't he end up going to Texas, if I remember right?
Yep.
So you need to kind of sort all these things out, because I think we are going to see with NIL that things are going to level out a little bit. Your top kids are still going to end up at top schools and everything. And both these guys are like 4 stars. So we're not putting them in, just lumping them in the middle. But if you take the temperature and the temperature ain't right, it's best to sit there and make sure you're putting widgets in other baskets, because there's no reason to waste time. But especially again with Landon, I certainly can talk some on Gus Cordova as well. I mean, if he's talking to Larry on a daily basis, Larry Johnson has brand new contract for a couple more years. I'm sure he's still being recruited against that. He's just seconds away from retirement. But I think that shows how Larry feels about Landon in terms of where his recruitment stands. And then certainly with Gus Cordova coming out of Lake Travis, which is just a huge talent producing school out of Austin. Ohio State has tried to get in there multiple times, has had a little bit of success, but I think that these are both going to be huge, huge visits. And while we've done Texas before on the Southern Swing, and we haven't in other years, I mean, if both of these guys are looking good, maybe I might be able to get some Buckyes in my future out of the state of Texas.
Yeah, they were interesting to me. I knew they'd offered. I knew they were, talking to Landon a little bit, but my quick conversation with Landon was kind of a little bit eye-opening. So I think that one's especially worth watching. But again, you're going to be talking about short lists of Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Ohio State. Well, who's the outlier, and what does that mean? And why are they are they an outlier because that's where he's leaning, or are they an outlier because it looks good on the table when you pick Oklahoma or Texas? So it's always interesting trying to decipher some of this. But again, they've got to figure this out in March. They've got to know, like, okay, are you serious about Ohio State? And because if you're not, if this visit wasn't for you, if you're not going to leave Texas, if you're not going to, really put too much thought into leaving the region, then, let's put resources elsewhere. So these are two, I think, important visits for Ohio State to kind of take the temperature. That brings us to the next two, which are enormous visits. I think there's a lot of March visits that haven't been scheduled yet that probably will be scheduled here in the next few weeks, but I don't know that we're going to see anyone eclipse these two upcoming visits in terms of importance. First one is TJ Alford, 4-star linebacker, Vero Beach, Florida. March 23rd visit, March 30th decision. Not a slam dunk that Ohio State's the last visit, just because there's so many Florida schools involved with him. He could sneak somewhere in Florida before that, but decent chance they're the last visit before he sits down and makes his announcement. A lot to unpack there. My personal feeling has been that Ohio State leads at some point in the last 3 or 4 months has taken the lead from Florida, who I think was the early team to beat. I think that was before the offers started rolling in and visits started happening, and before the process really got started. I felt like, all things equal, Florida was probably the favorite. But then he visits Ohio State a couple times. He gets around the country a little bit, starts building relationships with all the coaches. The football season happens. I think somewhere along the way, Ohio State took the lead. And so that was my stance. And then you have the James Laurinaitis situation. And boy, do I think that helped. I don't know if you don't promote James Laurinaitis and he goes elsewhere, like he goes to the NFL or something, I don't know if you can win this on March 30th. Now, you might be able to win it back later. I mean, who knows? I mean, nothing's done on March 30th. He can't sign anything on March 30th. But I don't think you can get his commitment on March 30th. So I think this was huge. I think this was a huge piece of the puzzle for them.
Yeah, because we wouldn't have even known if Ohio State doesn't promote James Laurinaitis. Is it because they bring in another defensive line coach as kind of that plan for when Larry hangs it up? They have the heir apparent in place, and Jim Knowles is still really your linebacker coach. Do they pursue another linebacker coach? We had all of our theories, and certainly we had our sources that were telling us, what things could have been, but we haven't heard point blank from Ryan Day, and we never will hear point blank from Ryan Day exactly how all of that went down with 100% certainty. So we don't know. Ohio State certainly had the opportunity to probably sneak back in because, let's be honest, Florida Gators are a hot mess. They really are a hot mess right now in terms of their on-field product and so on and so forth. And Billy Napier just has not necessarily worked out there yet. But that doesn't change the fact that when it comes to a March 30th decision date, that there was a lot of emphasis that Florida was early on was the team. Ohio State, even around the time of last Southern Swing, he was on the list of kids that we were going to try to see. Vero just was not necessarily somewhere that I think we went through Vero Beach at like 8 p.m. at night as we were driving down to South Florida. It just wasn't meant to be on how it was on how our travels were. But the James Laurinaitis factor is going to be huge. And James Laurinaitis, when he was kind of the interim 10th coach as they were still sorting things out and recruiting with Ryan Day, I know for a fact that he was very impactful with the linebackers that he was getting out and talking to and so on and so forth. So whether or not Ohio State is the last visit on the 23rd, that remains to be seen, as you said, just because of proximity, and it's not that hard to jump in the car and throw your sun pass in the windshield and drive to one of the big three out there or whatever. But you have to like Ohio State's chances right now, especially with James Laurinaitis and having that locked in and everything else. And schools will not be able to recruit against Laurinaitis of this unknown future, as he is now officially that 10th coach under contract, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. So there's going to be a round of visits here for TJ. He's going to get to Miami. He's going to get to UCF. He's very good chance he'll end up getting like a Florida, maybe a Florida State in there as well. He's got a couple more I think he's trying to set up. So he's going to try and get to like all his top schools here again before that March 30th decision. But the Ohio State one is locked in for the 23rd. I would say it's going to be Ohio State right now. But obviously we got to get through the visits. I think the timing is phenomenal for Ohio State with the visit kind of right before the decision, with James Laurinaitis just being announced. I talked to TJ about that a little bit the other day. There was a story on that on our site, BuckeyeHuddle.com. If you didn't check that out, just saying, basically, I'll paraphrase, but just saying, if I was going to pick Ohio State, I would want James Laurinaitis to be there. So he's going to be there. So we'll see. But yeah, I like where Ohio State stands. I think they've got a really good chance to close the deal there on that last visit. But we'll see how everything plays out here the next month. There's another visit just a couple days after that one that is, if not more important, at least equally important. Top 100 running back Jordan Davison out of Mater Dei is going to arrive on March 27th and is going to stay for about like 90 days or so. No, he's like staying through like April 2nd, I think he told me. So it's like a 5-day visit. And as we know from seeing Jordan at camp and some other stuff, we know he travels with an entourage. And I say that tongue in cheek. It's his family. I mean, it's like his mom and dad and grandparents, and the whole crew was out last summer. So I suspect there will be a good sized crew coming in with him here this spring. I have always given Ohio State an edge here. There's just been a really good feeling for me about this one. Just talking to Jordan, talking to some people around him, watching what he's doing with all the visits. He's made it a point to get back to Ohio State multiple times. I think it'll be his fourth. I want to say his fourth. Don't hold me to that, but he's been down several times already. So he's taking this very seriously. Clearly, Ohio State's prioritized him. This has kind of been their top guy. Alabama, Georgia, Texas have kind of been the three. I think Oregon you could probably throw in there. Those are probably the four I've thought about. There doesn't seem to be quite as much happening with Georgia right now as maybe there was a year ago. With Alabama, the Saban thing is okay, I don't know how he can, if he's going to wait until December, that's fine, but I don't know how he could make it a spring decision. Just too much uncertainty, I think, around Alabama right now, what that's going to look like moving forward. And so for me, this is kind of Ohio State and Texas right now, with Oregon maybe trying to play spoiler. Jordan has told me in the past he's leaving California, which is why you don't see USC or UCLA or any of those schools on there. Oregon's still a West Coast school, but that's far enough. That's not Eugene, Oregon is not SoCal. It's not Orange County. It is not the same place. So Oregon's get maybe a compromise if he doesn't want to be that far. If he wants to get be able to get a decent flight. I don't know, but even flights out there are a couple hours. I think people think that's just a hop, skip, and a jump, but it's still a decent flight. So he wants to get away from home. Could he pull the trigger out of this? That's what I'm wondering. Could they get the commitment coming out of this visit? I don't think it's out of the question.
So many things I want to say here. So let me see if I can say them in an order where it makes sense and I get all of my thoughts out. First of all, for the distance, yeah, it's like flying from Jacksonville to New York City or something like that. I mean, it's not like it's, like a 30-minute flight from LAX to San Francisco or something like that. It's a real flight. Mater Dei has kind of been that bugaboo school. Ohio State hasn't landed a kid since Nicky Sualua. Now, remember, that is also the school now where Chris Henry Jr. is at. So at some point, I can stop bringing up the Nicky Sualua thing once Chris Henry Jr. signs, but he's a 26 and Jordan Davison is a 25. Ohio State has a lot of options at running back. And there was a question of how many running backs Ohio State would be able to take in this class of 25. And one way or the other, the seas opened up a little bit when Jordan Lyle leaves the class, and Ohio State only takes 2 running backs instead of 3 running backs in the class of 2024. Now, Jordan Davison wants to go to Ohio State. He's not somebody you're going to say no to. I don't care what anybody says. You take him. You absolutely take him. But with Marquise Davis and Bo Jackson in state, could Jordan Davison just sit there and say, I'm going to lock my spot in, and at this point, and just do that and make Ohio State have to figure out what it wants to do between Marquise Davis and Bo Jackson, and what happens there. So I know there's been a lot of Texas buzz, certainly amongst Texas writers. I think that the interest in the Longhorns is very real. And you look at what You look at what Texas has done recently on its ground game, and its running game has been more impressive than Ohio State's as of late. But now you look at Ohio State with the addition of Quinshon Judkins. You look at Ohio State with the addition of Chip Kelly and what his offenses look like. Does that create even more of a comfort factor for when he comes on campus? Because he's still going to be deciding before he would see any of the on-field product from 24. But I could certainly see an avenue of where he's like, I've seen what I need to see. I mean, of course, you're going to have to hang on for dear life because Cruton is Cruton. But I mean, I could see a scenario of where this is very much a quick business decision.
This is a long visit. He took a long visit last summer. They were on campus for like 3 or 4 days last summer. So I don't think they need to do this. I really think this is like coming down to the wire now. It feels like it's coming down to the wire. It feels like these are visits that are, we are going to spend as much time as possible on this campus to try and uncover a reason why this doesn't fit. We need to unearth every stone, overturn every stone. I really think that's what this is. Like I said, they've already done the multi-day visit to Ohio State. They've done the game day visit. Like they don't need to do this. So if this was like an in and out thing last summer, and then they just came in and out for the game, and they've never really done anything outside the football facility, this would make more sense in terms of, oh, they just need to see more of like they've seen everything. So this is a want to now. This is a, we've done what we need to. Now, what do we want to do in terms of visiting? And so I think it's a very good sign for Ohio State. I, of course, am not going to get overconfident here until like the signatures in December, but I've always given them the edge here, and I'm going to continue to do that. And I think this visit it would not shock me if one of two things happened coming out of this visit. Either a relatively quick decision or something where it just pushes them into the driver's seat, and maybe there's a return official in June to kind of put a stamp on it. But I think they're in great position here to put the clamps down on this one, and that would be something. And that gets into all sorts of other discussions of like, okay, if you can get him early, what do you do about the Ohio kids? What do you do about Byron Lewis, who, from everything I've been told, Tony Alford's going to have to be drug, kicking and screaming away from Byron Lewis. Like he's just not going to let that one go. Despite what's happened the last couple of years down there with Fletcher and Lyle, he's just not willing to stop recruiting Byron Lewis. So this could lead to a whole different series of decisions that need to be made for sure. But like this has been their guy that they've zeroed in on, and here's their chance with a 5-day visit. Like I'll even take the negative side. I'll take the other side. Let's go to the other side of this. So he did this thing last summer where you had him on campus for multiple days. He's done the game. So he's done all this stuff. If you come out of you get him on the campus for 5 more days and you don't feel good about him, what are we doing here? Kid spent 2 weeks on campus already without even taking an official. So if you don't feel good about this coming out of this 5-day visit, I don't know what to tell you. You probably need to move on. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I just think this is all setting up very well for them.
When recruiting running backs against Texas, Ohio State needs to recruit the grandmother. So it's a good thing that she's part of the entourage. If we remember Bijan Robinson and everything that happened there, I mean, will never be moved off of my position that if it was not for grandma coming in, Bijan Robinson would have been at Ohio State. So
I can share this now. He's in the freaking NFL, and we were at the what did they call it? The Rivals Challenge.
5-star challenge.
Yep, 5-star challenge. Bijan Robinson told half of that locker room he was going to Ohio State that weekend. And anyone who knows Bijan knows he's not a game player. He's not a person who misleads, pretty straight shooter. So, something happened.
Yeah.
We all believe it was, grandma and grandpa kind of broke down.
We want to be closer. I mean, remember, Bijan was out of
the
state of
we love
Arizona.
Texas, and it's closer, and please don't go all the way up there. And
right.
Yeah.
But with Jordan Davison, you don't load up the family on an unofficial. I mean, granted, even on an official, you can only bring 2 guardians with you now under the newer rules. It used to be 1. You don't load up everybody and fly 2/3 of the way across the country to spend March in Columbus, Ohio, because it can snow in Columbus, Ohio into the 3rd week of April, if we're being honest with ourselves. You just don't know. Weather can be kind of unpredictable. I would much rather be in Newport Beach, California, or something along those lines, not that far away from the modern-day campus in Santa Ana. So there is definitely something to it. If you're going to spend a grand total of 2 weeks with the family and everything else, it's serious. Obviously Ohio State has to do its part and produce a great visit, and I'm sure that'll be the case. And then we'll see. Then we'll see whether or not, as you said, an official follows in June just to be the final thing, or if he's like, I've seen enough. And then, of course, we know when it comes to kids as well, and each kid's going to be a little bit different.
Yep.
I'm committed, but do more visits take place after that point? And that's something that we can't necessarily predict. I mean, though we do have some kids that are so transparent, they're like, I'm going to commit somewhere, but I'm not nearly done. So,
and last point, you talked about Chris Henry Jr. a little bit. He's already on it. He's already working Jordan Davison. He's already working Nasir Wyatt, who's a kind of a outside linebacker edge prospect that James Laurinaitis has taken a liking to. So Chris Henry, I kind of joked about it on the board, but there's some truth to it. That he's kind of an Ohio State plant out there. Let's break the modern day curse. Let's send Chris Henry Jr. out there. Covert operation.
I don't know how covert it is.
Yeah. It's I don't think it was planned like that, but I certainly think it's going to play out that way. He's going to be out there doing the Lord's work in at Modern Day, and probably at some other places out there too. So I think Ohio State's going to be able to take a little bit of advantage of that. So big March coming up. You want to be on BuckeyeHuddle.com, get all the premium information we'll be dropping on the visits, skull sessions, just quick hitters, insight, predictions, all the latest intel we get from a monster month of visits. Spring ball again, maybe the most highly anticipated spring that we can remember. 7-8 years, maybe. At least since maybe the year after the national championship, when you still had the quarterback competition going. Maybe that.
Certainly 15, and I think before that 12 in year 1 of Urban Meyer. Coming off of 6 and 7, how that was going to be. But yeah, I think 15 is the safe answer.
Yeah. So great time to sign up for BuckeyeHuddle.com if you're not already. Get all the spring ball updates, all the recruiting updates that's going to be happening. March is going to be a monster month. So is April. So it's a great time to get started now and give us a shot. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because that helps other Ohio State fans find us. And if you're listening, 5-star ratings are appreciated on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening. And again, that also helps other Ohio State fans and college football fans find us. So hope everyone enjoyed this episode. We're going to do some interesting stuff here the next week or two with some new episodes. We're going to talk about some of our top targets, most important target lists. We're going to do some cool stuff like that, some interactive stuff. I think we're going to do a listener questions episode as well. So keep it locked in here. But appreciate everyone watching, appreciate everyone listening, and we'll talk to you soon.